Do you want to be creative but you can't figure out what to do? Maybe a card design isn't coming to you. This is a great time to pull out an art journal and just have a play with your supplies. Hey guys, it's Amber and we're going to jump right into creating. I have an A5 watercolor sketchbook here and I'm going to be using the colors from the Altenew June 2021 Inspiration Challenge. So that's blue, yellow, and brown. I'm going to join some circles together because I want to see how the watercolor paints are going to bleed into each other. That did really well with these first two, and you can see both of them were still really wet. And then as I moved through this process, I got distracted with what was going on around me, and I let the circles start to dry too much. And so you can see that they just don't bleed into each other quite as much. They needed to be wetter, or I needed to work faster than what I was working to get that same effect that I got in the first one. In addition to that, not all colors react the same way. Some colors, watercolors, really love water and will just move into that water like lightning, whereas other watercolors, and I'm not talking brand specific, I'm talking the difference between one color to the next, even within the same brand, they just react differently. So this is a good opportunity to take a look at your different colors and see which ones really move and spread out in water and which ones kind of stay more where you put them. And the reason I decided to do a sketchbook page today is because I just could not come up with a card design. I'm going to move on to the woodless watercolor pencils, and I'm just going to do some doodling on here. Not very much, just a little bit. I dipped the pencil into water before I brought it to the page, and you'll see me keep dipping it in there. So the reason I decided to do an art journal page instead of a card is because I couldn't come up with a design. And it was because of the brown. I don't know what it is about brown that totally zaps my creativity, but it does. And so I thought it might be easier just to create these circles in an art journal and see where it goes from there. Do some doodling, do some stamping, and see what happens. Is there a particular color that just totally zaps your creativity or that you avoid because it just doesn't inspire you? Let me know in the comments down below. So I did a bit of doodling there with the watercolor pencil that I did not like at all. It didn't come out well. So yep, here comes the stamping. We're going to cover that up with a dovetail butterfly. Because the stamp is large and detailed, it's going to cover up that area beautifully. So if you make a mistake, don't panic. Just cover it up. Either try and lift the watercolor or you can cover it up. And that covers it up pretty well, but we're going to keep adding more to this page. So I have the Deco wallpaper stencil here, and I pulled out the embossing paste, and I'm just going to mix that with a little bit of Snapdragon ink that I've just smushed onto my glass mat. And then I also added caramel toffee to deepen up the color. Now I put the stencil right there because the stem of that doodle that I had done was big and kind of honking right there. So that just helps to mask it. It's not going to completely cover it up, but it'll mask it some. So you can see I'm just doing some partial embossing paste here. I don't want to cover up all of my design, but I want to have some overlap. I want to add some texture. Now, ultimately, the color of this embossing paste isn't going to matter because I'm going to sprinkle over the copper embossing powder, and we'll go ahead and heat emboss this. So this is going to add some nice sparkle, and it's richer and more interesting than just the brown. I did really like the color of that embossing paste, and I wish I had left some, but the one thing about embossing paste is you have to wait for it to dry, right? If you heat emboss over it though, the heat tool is going to help dry it and you can move on with your creating. I really don't like to wait for embossing paste. I really don't like to wait for anything to dry, you guys. I'm just impatient and I want to keep going rather than wait for things to dry. So that's like one of the big advantages of heat embossing over your embossing paste. So I pulled out the maple yellow woodless watercolor pencil, and I'm just going to add a little bit of color to the butterflies where there was just white space. I added it to a couple areas that were blue, and so that turned a little bit green. And then I'll just add another yellow circle over here because it was looking a little lonely in that corner. I've pulled out the Altenew fine liner set, and this is the brush nib. I wanted to add a little more black to this piece and also accentuate some of these circles a little more. So I'll start off with just one line and then I go back in and add a second kind of more wavy line, which gives it an appearance of kind of like a circle of thread. I felt like the body of this dovetail butterfly was a little too sketchy, so I'll just fill some of that in with the brush liner. So I was thinking about shading, and because the butterflies are black, I didn't want to actually use a pencil or a black charcoal or anything like that to shade, to kind of separate the butterflies from the page or any of the circles from the page. So I thought I would add a little more paint down here. I decided to use the woodless watercolor pencils, and I think that I missed the white space. I can't decide whether or not I like the addition of these colors or not. So I started with ultramarine, then I added turquoise because the ultramarine just didn't match the rest of the blues on the page. And then I decided to add some of this. Now I do like this added color kind of in between the embossing paste and the embossing powder there. I just kind of wish I had left a little more white space on this piece overall. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe down below, and make sure you put notifications on so you don't miss any additional videos from Altenew or myself. I decided to do a little more doodling with a white Posca pen and the brush tip pen, and I'm adding, instead of adding shadows underneath the butterflies, I decided to add a little bit of highlight just to separate them a little bit. I felt like they were getting a little bit lost. There wasn't a lot of definition in them, so I'm just adding some white charcoal pencil here and there. I'm not completely outlining the butterflies, but just trying to lift them off the page. Next up, I'll rehydrate the white watercolor, and you want to let the white sit for a little bit with some water in it, and then you'll be able to pick it up and splatter it pretty easily. So I'll just put on some white splatter, and here is that finished page. Now, as I said, I couldn't decide whether or not I wanted to leave more white space on here. So I will go on to do another page on the left-hand side, and I love the copper embossing powder. I think that's really pretty. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I wanted to show you a couple things. I have the Painted Dots washi tape down here, and then on my finger I have a little bit of gesso. You cannot paint on top of washi tape with watercolors. It won't dry. It'll kind of just bead up, and I'm going to show you that. So what I wanted to do is have this washi tape underneath some of my watercolor. I'm going to do circles like the other page, but I also want to add like just some regular brush strokes and play around with the shape of the brush as well. So adding some different patterns rather than just the circles that I did in the last one. So here's the difference. So that circle is on top of the gesso, and then that dot that I put above it, you can see it just beaded up, and it's not going to absorb into the washi tape. The paint is going to absorb a little bit into the gesso, and it will dry. It's not going to absorb the same as it does on your paper, but you can definitely paint on the washi tape if you prime it with the gesso. So if you're wanting to add more layers, that's one thing that you can do. I'll just add a few brushstroke patterns, and then I'll show you some close-ups of the finished product. Here you can see the copper embossing powder on top of the embossing paste, and I love the look of that. And I think I do like this spread on the right. You can see I added some white Posca pen to the butterflies to help accentuate those. On the second page, I used the sphere stencil instead of the deco wallpaper stencil. So next time you're stuck and you can't figure out a card design, try pulling out an art journal and just having a play. I had a lot of fun on these 2 pages, and I hope you did too. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you soon with more inspiration.
Hello crafters, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching!